Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be discussing all the different Monster Point cards available and ranking them based on viability, strengths, and to a certain extent ease of access. So I've done something similar in the past in which I've compared the various Monster Point cards. However, that became outdated as new ones have been released, and also the new evolutions for the original 5. So now's a great time to take a second look at this because in North America, as part of the big event extravaganza, we are actually going to be having access to a free 390,000 Monster Points. So because of this, many players will be perhaps achieving their very first Monster Point Dragon, along with those players who are nearing the cap of 999,999 being forced to purchase something perhaps prematurely because they're just simply going to cap out. So basically, this tier list that I'm going to be showing you here is basically weighing the value of all the Monster Point cards if you look at them from a full point of view in terms of like their viability as a leader and as a sub. Because some of them definitely have viability as a sub, and it's not just about being a leader. While some of these cards are only leaders, it's worth mentioning that they may have other uses. So basically, this chart will take into consideration all of the current buffs and evolutions that are available in Japan as of today. Just because North America does not have these cards yet, or those evolutions or buffs, does not mean we're not going to. We will have them at some point, and it's best to plan out accordingly. So basically, this list can be somewhat subjective. There could be some of my opinion based in it, but I think it's relatively objective for the most part. And I'm going to be basically discussing all of them in greater detail in a moment. So presently speaking, at the very top is Raw Dragon and Athena, or Dark Athena, which should be no surprise as those two comprise basically some of the strongest teams in Puzzle and Dragons. In the second tier would be the new Yomi Dragon, which is pretty ugly to look at, but is actually quite powerful as a leader and a sub. In the third tier, we actually have the new Odin Dragon, which may sound surprising. We also have Ragnarok Dragon and Shiva Dragon. Finally, in what I like to call the question mark tier, because they have some uses, not so much, is Neptune Dragon, Xiu Min, and Plum. And finally, in basically the no tier is Yao Yu and Shan Mei, which is kind of a surprise because those used to be at the top at one point of the meta. So let's take a little look at what makes Raw Dragon so powerful and exciting. So Raw Dragon's pros are that he is able to form a 2.25 times health, 144 times attack, and 2.25 times recovery team. Now, this is a very safe and consistent team because not only do you have bind immune leaders, his ideal or optimal team tends to be fully bind immune. And because of that, you actually are able to load up on different types of utility because you don't actually have to worry about binds. You are also able to easily overcome combo shields because you are, to a certain extent, a purely combo-based leader. Granted, you must have all 6 elements, but if you are able to optimize the board and make, say, 8 combos every turn, you should, in theory, always have an activatable board subsequently on the next turn. Now, as another big pro, he is actually less ugly than before, but unfortunately, as a con, he is still quite ugly. So it's an upgrade, but it still hasn't pushed him into the good-looking tier, I guess. So the cons of Raw Dragon are that he has a very restrictive team building. Like, yes, you can divert from it, but that is going to greatly lower his consistency, and it is his consistency that is his shining factor. So that is a big deal because very few players are actually able to create the ideal Raw Dragon team. In addition, he is actually quite slow to play. You must make, generally speaking, 6 combos every turn to sweep a floor, and that also is quite mentally taxing because you have to make not just 6 combos, but 6 different element matches. In addition, he has a lackluster base active, which is pretty much always inherited over top of and rarely ever used in its base form. He also has virtually no sub potential, so while those may sound like depressing cons, he's actually still incredibly powerful. So this Raw Dragon team is considered to be relatively the strongest one available. There may be some new Japan cards that might replace Orochi, the one that removes locked orbs, but right now this would probably be the strongest team that we can actually formulate. There is a little bit of wiggle room in terms of inherits because yes, you can use like say Sharia's Roots or Lightnings, Dark Callies or Ichigos, wherever you please, whatever you have more of, but to be fair, you want to try and transfer those desirable stats because of the inheritance changes. So generally speaking, there is a Lightning and an Indra on your Raw Dragons. You might have double Indras depending on the dungeon. It just basically all depends on what you need to counter. You have, obviously, more board change inherits for the Dark Callies to provide skill delay protection. You have generally Orochi on Isis for delays, and Facet on Canna for the stat transfer. Now, you can obviously transfer Carrot or Sheen, who pretty much provide the exact same amount of damage enhancement, but there's no stat transfer. And again, we want to min-max our potential because Raw Dragon is meant to clear the hardest content in the game. He's not for mindless farming. So, because of this ideal team is generally very safe, it's very hard to divert from it because if you remove any piece of that puzzle, so to speak, you are going to lower his chances of success, as well as if you don't have the correct inherits. Because you generally need a Gemstone Princess because 144 times, while great on paper, is actually not that powerful for the most part in terms if you need to hit, say, 12 million or more damage, such as when you're playing Arena 3 towards the end floors. So you need that Gemstone Princess, and that can be problematic because those are rare to acquire. Of course, Canna and Dark Callies are 6 stars, Lightning's a rare collab, more duplicate Dark Callies and Ichigo's a rare collab. It's just a very tough team to formulate, and you can perhaps maybe dump out, say, Canna and replace it with maybe something like Ariel, but of course Ariel's not as ideal from a stats and awakenings point of view. You can, in theory, start utilizing maybe the reincarnated gods such as Anubis or Parvati to replicate maybe a second Dark Callie or a Canna. You basically have to try and find some replacements, but if you find yourself constantly taking out subs and diverting from this kind of core team, you're going to have issues with consistency, and at that point, Raw Dragon is probably not the leader you want to run. So you should probably be looking elsewhere if you can't at least as closely replicate this team as possible. If you wish to read my full review, you can obviously click this link here, which is linked in the YouTube description down below. Next is Dark Athena, and Dark Athena has many great things going for her. She has either 12.25 or 49 times attack, and her base attack is actually 2,500, and that is actually very synergistic with her triple TPA awakenings. She also has obviously a tanky leader skill in which she's able to form a very durable team, as well as being able to form essentially what is one of the strongest and fastest teams in Puzzle & Dragons. You can actually quickly clear content like Arena 3 with very little mental taxation compared to Raw Dragon. And her team building is quite flexible because, generally speaking, all you really need to prioritize are Dark TPA subs. She is also bind immune, and her active skill actually provides a damage enhance and delay component. Naturally, because she's a TPA-based team, she can overcome combo shields. And one amazing shining factor is Dark Athena does not actually have any evolution requirements. She comes ready to use as soon as you purchase her. So that is a great benefit, especially to newer players who are not able to, say, clear Arena 3 and acquire the Radar Dragons. In terms of her cons, you have to obviously match Water and Dark in order to proc her recovery component. So it can make stalling a little problematic because you're going to be dealing damage whenever you want to heal. So it's just not quite as practical to stall. There's also no skill bind resist on her, so she is almost kind of like the Raw Dragon of old, in which you must run a double skill bind resist sub when playing solo mode. And you do, to a certain extent, require a Gemstone Princess to achieve a large enough burst damage. It's just kind of unfortunate Gemstones have become somewhat crucial in running many high-end teams. Now, one thing about Dark Athena I should mention is that she actually costs 750,000 monster points. And while this may seem truly outrageous, it's actually not too bad because of the fact that she comes ready to use and has gentle team building, and she's very fast and reasonably consistent when playing through endgame content. So in all honesty, I feel like the cost is justifiable because it is a very accessible card, and pretty much everyone should have at least subs to run her reasonably efficiently. It's not as rigid as Raw Dragon for success. Now, one thing I want to really emphasize is that a lot of gameplay in Puzzle & Dragons is somewhat repetitive because you tend to play the same dungeon over and over again. And when that is the case, you want to try and find ways to min-max your time efficiency because, let's be honest, if you're going to play a dungeon, say, 50 times, why not try and play it as efficiently as possible? And this is where Dark Athena comes in handy because she is very easy and relatively mindless to use, and you can quickly clear content. I know that's the cops because Dark Athena is so powerful, but you can quickly clear content, and that's a big deal, and that's a great advantage to have because you are able to use her for essentially any dungeon in the game. You don't have to really worry about mental taxation at that point. So, generally speaking, when you are team building her, you want to try and find a sub with usually double skill bind resist, so usually Durga and Awoken Oku. And at that point, you want to basically just load them on TPA cards. And if you are playing in co-op mode, you don't have to have a double skill bind resist sub. So this is just like a small list of notably strong subs, as well as reasonably powerful inherits to have at your disposal. So if you have at least some of these cards, it may be worthwhile purchasing because at least Greta is farmable, and she's actually a very powerful powerful sub for Dark Athena. So, in all honesty, it depends what part of the game you're at. If you are, say, lacking an absurd amount of Dark TPA subs, you still could probably get by with running, say, like Pandora or other strong Dark subs just because Dark Athena's triple TPA is going to somewhat carry your team forward from a damage point of view. And in all honesty, not everyone is interested in farming Arena 3 over and over again, where you need to somewhat min-max your team a little stronger. So, overall, I feel like Dark Athena has one of the gentlest team building requirements, and she comes ready to use. You don't have to go through basically a complicated evolution tree compared to other monster point cards, and I highly recommend you purchase her if you have enough monster points and at least a reasonable team to support her. If you wish to read a full review on her, you can click this link here. Next is Yomi Dragon, and Yomi Dragon is definitely a step down from Raw Dragon and Dark Athena. However, they have many great things going for her. First off, she is 81 times attack and 4 times recovery, and all she actually needs is a 5-orb 1 enhance to actually trigger 81 times. So one combo for 5-orb 1 enhance is quite amazing. That's a very large amount of damage, and that actually allows her to clear content very quickly while having great sustain through the high recovery. Now, there is some damage control aspect because you do have a flat multiplier for just using dark gods, and you can to a certain extent just match dark combos without connecting the 5 orbs, and you can chip down things like Sopdet relatively easily. Her awakenings are very utility oriented, which goes beautifully with the bind recovery and the bind immunity she has, as well as she has a reasonably synergistic active that produces 4 hearts and 4 dark orbs with 1 turn of haste. So it does fit well in her kit. While it may not necessarily allow full activation because 4 dark orbs does not trigger obviously 5 or 1 enhance, you should at least have 1 from beforehand. And again, you can overcome combo shields because unlike a Heart Cross, a 5-orb 1 enhance is not as spatially demanding. As well, she also has flexible team building, but not as flexible as Dark Athena. So, the cons of Yomi Dragon are no health multiplier. In addition, you actually require and must have an enhanced orb for damage. So that means if your dark orbs are removed, or say it's a full board of poison from Beelzebub, you will have to spend 2 different actives to actually achieve your full multiplier, and that can be problematic. There is also modestly high reliance on Eshimali just because Yomi Dragon lacks offensive awakenings herself, and you have to rely on your subs to deal damage. And finally, they have really bad, almost like Pokemon style art, and she was quite glorious before, and it's just weird now. So, while Yomi Dragon did receive a somewhat less spectacular evolution than Raw Dragon, you still are able to form a very fast and reasonably consistent team. She should be able to tackle Arena 3 level content as well as quickly farming Arena 1 just because one combo will kill quite a few floors, and obviously I feel like most players are more skilled to be able to match more than a 5-orb 1 enhance. So you can quickly mow through a dungeon and you can reap many rewards. Furthermore, the fact that she has great sub potential allows her to be used very well on other teams. She has great transitional value, just not as a leader but also as a sub, because most dark teams can utilize her very efficiently just because she provides a beneficial active and that nice time extend and big stat stick body. Now, in terms of team building, yes, it is very flexible, but I want to kind of highlight or mention kind of what it would be like, almost like the holy trinity for Yomi Dragon, because generally speaking, an Eshimali, an Akachi, and a Haku of either Christmas or Awoken form is very powerful. Haku Akachi has an incredible burst board, and Eshimali is there for her amazing active skill, as well as a 7 enhanced orbs. So, if you at least have some of these subs, as well as other dark gods, you may find value in purchasing Yomi Dragon if Dark Athena doesn't really work out for you, or you just don't have the monster points. Next is Odin Dragon, and Odin Dragon was a surprisingly powerful card because, in all honesty, when Odin Dragon was released, he was kind of the laughingstock of the Monster Point Dragon collection. He really had almost no viability. It was just like an extreme luxury card. And now, the Odin Dragon actually gained 2 different evolutions, and his offensive evolution, which actually boasts a 1,838 times attack multiplier, is quite relevant. In addition to that outrageously high multiplier when matching 3 color crosses, you also have 20,940 auto healing with dual leaders that are 297. So basically that means every single turn you make one combo, you are going to heal for almost 21,000 health. That's pretty amazing in all honesty, because it is an interesting twist on the whole defensive multiplier mechanic. Odin Dragon also has a scaling attack multiplier because, again, you have to match 3 color crosses for 1,800, but you can choose to match 1 or 2 and control your damage accordingly. He is also bind immune, and bind immunity is a very important aspect in determining whether a card is very powerful as a leader or even as a sub. They have a huge amount of weighted stats, they have flexible team building, and they have quite a bit of utility-oriented awakenings, as well as a recover bind, should you wish to clear binds with a row of hearts. Now, the drawbacks of Odin Dragon are that there is no health multiplier, and they generally have a lower combo count just because they have to match multiple color crosses for damage. Their base active is quite weak as a leader, just because you don't want to have 2 amazing bind clear actives at the same time, as well as the fact that Green Odin does exist, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. In addition, their leadership potential is really not that strong when you compare it to the other cards mentioned above, just because they do have a few glaring weaknesses. And perhaps one bad thing is that they have one of the worst artworks. It's somewhat offensive to look at. So the thing about 1,800 times attack is that you are able to basically penetrate through high defense monsters such as pre-draws, so you don't actually have to budget active skill for a poison or true damage. However, because you don't actually have any health multiplier, you are going to have to rely on lots of shields or damage mitigations when passing through challenging content. So this can at least clog up some of your active skill usage, but it may not necessarily be a bad thing because you generally want to inherit something over top of Odin Dragon. Now, while Odin Dragon's active skill is very long and very powerful, you generally don't want to have 2 of them at the same time. So you have to obviously make intelligent decisions when team building Odin Dragon, but you can basically use any wood or any light sub that you wish. If you have a very strong light box, you can actually benefit from Odin Dragon because those subs have a great amount of carryover. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that because Odin Dragon has the 21,000 auto heal, that is great for most content. However, if you have to stall on floors that have, say, 40,000 damage hits, it may be a little challenging, and you may eventually start slowly dying out because of the fact that there's no actual base multiplier component. Yes, you're healing 21,000 health every turn, but when matching hard orbs, you are probably not going to be healing that much, unfortunately. So it may become a little challenging. This mostly applies to when you're playing co-op when your health is very high, but it's just something worth being aware of. It's a small downside, but it's something worth mentioning. In addition, one other downside is that Odin Dragon cannot be inherited, and not every team can run Odin Dragon efficiently because, generally speaking, you would tend to inherit Green Odin around if you want to have that bind recovery active skill. So obviously on mono wood teams it's a great option, but if you're using other color teams, you can't use Odin Dragon that efficiently, so it just lowers his value. If he could be inherited around, it would definitely improve their viability significantly. So again, it's a reasonably strong card, but you should just make sure the other options that are above are not better suited to your monster box. Next is Ragnarok Dragon, and Ragnarok Dragon Ragnarok Dragon has 2 killer awakenings. They have a very powerful base active skill, they are bind immune, and they do have beneficial color coverage on rainbow teams. Now, the main downsides of Ragnarok Dragon is that they don't have really any leadership potential, they don't have god typing, and the killers become problematic in some cases. And generally speaking right now, the teams that utilize Ragnarok Dragon well are somewhat falling out of favor, and a lot of Ragnarok Dragon's power is tied to the teams that he is used on, and if those teams start to decline, Ragnarok Dragon, by association, will decline as well. So, generally, like, presently speaking, the most viable teams Ragnarok Dragon can be used on are Ranave, Machine Athena, and Sharius Roots. Now, Ranave teams do have potential to clear endgame content, but if you are playing Arena 3, you can't actually have the Killer Awakenings unlocked because you will be unable to kill the majority of Radar Dragons and you will flounder. And if you don't utilize the Killer Awakening, he has much less value on, say, Machine Athena teams, who generally use Ragnarok Dragon as a speed farming setup in which they can clear Arena 1 very quickly. A single TPA will mow through plenty of content. So, you have to be very careful in where you utilize your Ragnarok Dragon and how many Awakenings you choose to unlock. It all depends what type of content you are trying to clear. Now, Sharius Roots has potential to become stronger with new evolution, but I don't foresee them becoming stronger than Raw Dragon, so I wouldn't really hold my breath there. So, obviously things can change if, say, Ranave does become stronger or Ragnarok Dragon gets an evolution to gain God typing, so they can be used on Raw Dragon teams. But for now, their uses are somewhat limited, but they fulfill, to a certain extent, a best-in-slot sub on those respective teams. I clearly live in a dangerous area. There's so many sirens. So, the next Monster Point Dragon, or Monster Point card, is Shiva Dragon. And Shiva Dragon boasts 39 times attack and 6.25 times recovery. And this is unconditional for fire god type monsters. And that means you can use a single TPA and kill a lot of floors in the game because Shiva Dragon has massive base attack and triple TPA. You generally also stack TPA cards. In addition, Shiva Dragon can boast very fast clears in longer dungeons, and I'm going to elaborate upon this in a moment. Also, they're not very orb hungry because, again, a single TPA can kill most floors. In addition, they have actually strong potential in future ranking dungeons, especially ranking dungeons with very long floor counts, like 10 or so floors. In addition, they probably have some of the best artwork for the Monster Point dragons, not necessarily the four gentlemen, but the dragons themselves. Unfortunately for cons, one of their biggest drawbacks is they require Hephaestus Dragon. And Hephaestus Dragon is, generally speaking, one of the harder Arena 3 encounters to clear successfully. It requires a large amount of planning. It's a lot easier in co-op for sure, and very challenging in solo mode. In addition, Shiva Dragon has a lackluster base active. It provides 2 turns of haste. De-doo. In addition, they have no health multiplier, and that kind of limits their uses in more endgame content. In addition, they are vulnerable to binds, and in fact, they are the first card I've mentioned thus far that actually does not have bind immunity. It just goes to show how powerful and important bind immunity is. And they're not meant for endgame content for that reason, because they're vulnerable to binds, they have a weak base active skill, and just too many different things can go wrong that you generally won't use them for super endgame content. In addition, they're not as great in shorter content. I'm going to explain that in a moment as well. In addition, they have virtually no sub potential. So I was kind of somewhat sitting on the fence when evaluating where Shiva Dragon should go, because I was like, is Shiva Dragon a checkmark or a question mark? And I kind of fell into the checkmark category just because Shiva Dragon is a little bit more viable than the other question mark cards, so I felt like it was worth including them there. So Shiva Dragon has perhaps some of the most viability in clearing longer dungeons very quickly. For example, they actually can farm Arena 1 very efficiently with relatively gentle team building requirements. And while farming Arena 1 is nothing flashy or special, doing it quickly is actually quite beneficial to newer players, because if you are able to farm Arena 1 consistently, you will have unlimited rank ups, you will have basically an unlimited supply of pies, so you can always max skill any card of your choice, and it will actually allow you to have lots of stamina to throw around in any dungeon you want. In addition, Shiva Dragon definitely clear a lot of the rogue descents or any other content that you do encounter. And the only reason why I say he's not as ideal for shorter content is because options like Awoken Liu Bei exist. Awoken Liu Bei definitely excels in the shorter contents like rogue descents because you can basically button your way through it. Now, not everyone has Liu Bei, but most people generally have an Australis, a Green Odin, or a Perseus at their disposal, so you can pair up a Liu Bei and still farm content quickly. Shiva Dragon does this quick as well, but nothing can really keep pace with that whole Lube Dios board swipe, aside from, say, Mary or Yamamoto's. But overall, Shiva Dragon is a viable card because you are able to clear a lot of content quickly, and it may definitely propel your monster box forward. But I do caution against purchasing them if you are unable to acquire Hephaestus Dragon, which is probably going to be the catch-22 because newer players love Shiva Dragon, but they can't get Hephaestus Dragon, so you can't make the evolution. Next is Neptune Dragon, and we're starting to enter like the lower end brackets of viability. So Neptune Dragon looks powerful on paper from a multiplier perspective. They have 2.25 times health and recovery, along with 100 times attack for water gods. They can also efficiently stack water rows because they also boast 4 themselves. In addition, it's a very durable and tanky team, and you can clear some end game content, but it's actually going to be quite slow. And they do also have the strongest poison available, which I guess is definitely a pro. However, in terms of cons, they are incredibly orb hungry. You require 18 connected water orbs for 100 times damage. What? Like, Mary requires 8. Sarasvati has 9 in 3 separate combos. Yamamoto is 6. Neptune Dragon is 18. I don't understand what they were thinking. If it was something much lower and reasonable, Neptune Dragon could have been significantly more viable. In addition, this is further compounded by the fact that their base active skill is rather lackluster. Yes, you have the strongest poison in the game, but on an incredibly long cooldown and dual leaders having it, you're not going to have much value out of it. In addition, their playstyle is slow. Yes, they may be able to clear reasonably, like a reasonable amount of endgame content, but if you do it so slowly, you're not going to be usually using them, say, compared to Yomi Dragon or Dark Athena by comparison, or even Odin Dragon. In addition, because you actually have to connect 18 water orbs, you will have a very low combo count. And in addition, he doesn't actually have a unicorn horn anymore, which makes no sense because their active skill is called Hydra's Horn or something along those lines. So I don't understand where this horn is coming from. And he's no longer the horniest dragon of them all. So a little disappointing there. I guess I should mention that you can pair Neptune Dragon with a Mary, but a Mary with Neptune Dragon is nowhere near as efficient as Mary, so it's just not a Mary pairing overall. So if you are thinking about purchasing Neptune Dragon, you should really think about what other cards you have at your disposal, because he is basically like a Krishna with a lower combo count and slower by comparison. So if you have cards like Krishna or other viable leaders, you're not really gaining any true benefit by purchasing Neptune Dragon, so I would caution against purchasing him. Next is Shiumin, and Shiumin boasts amazing artwork. They're basically top husbando quality. They have incredible base health, and they also have 17.5 times attack on their own. In addition, they also have Tifa pairings, and that Tifa pairing is crucial to success now. In addition, they can obviously stack light rows very efficiently. Unfortunately, they are vulnerable to binds. Their active skill can override hearts, so they don't have much use as a sub, and obviously makes problems when you're trying to heal, as well as deal damage. And they're quite orb hungry, as well as they're really only an average leader at best. So while you are able to pair Shiumin with Tifa and have a reasonably powerful 7x6 leader with a healthy recovery component, it's not going to clear that much endgame content. It's not going to really propel you that much further forward. And I really would strongly caution against using them because, in all honesty, if you have the subs to field the Shiumin team, you should be probably trying to use Miru if you are looking at an endgame optimization point of view. Next is Plum or Xinhua, and they basically are a very powerful sub for Gremory and Anaphon, and they have a very beneficial active for those teams. Unfortunately, they're not really a viable leader. They have balance typing, which excludes them from a lot of top-end dark teams. They're mostly a luxury, and they are vulnerable to binds, and their hands are quite disturbing. So they did gain some relevancy and resurgence of popularity just because of Gremory, but in all honesty, it's really just making a Gremory team a little bit stronger. And maybe if you want to min-max your Gremory team out more and you truly love them as your best team available and you have no other options for, say, Dark Athena or Yomi Dragon, maybe Plum can be a justifiable purchase, but it's not really necessary in my opinion overall. So I would only really purchase them if you have a really high-functioning Gremory team and the other Monster-Born cards cannot really benefit them. Next is Shan Mei. And Shan Mei, I am placing in the do not purchase category. And if I had said that, say, a year ago, people would have really lost their shit, because Shan Mei used to be a top tier leader. But in terms of their pros, they do have some damage control. They can choose to make a fire rope. They can choose to make 1, 2, or 3 heart combos. They can obviously stack fire rows quite efficiently. And their system team definitely works for easier content. And their multiplier is pretty strong on paper because they have 2.25 times health and 81 times attack, along with 1,000 base recovery. So they can definitely heal up after attacks. However, power creep has not been kind to them, especially with the Heart Cross meta, but they're for starters, they are vulnerable to binds, and they require duplicates for success. But that duplicate team, which forms a system, has issues in late game because system teams cannot feasibly counter all foreseeable mechanics in a longer dungeon like Arena 3. You have to dedicate 4 active skills to looping your system, and that means only 2 for utility. So you are going to falter in endgame content because things are so much harder than they were when she was released. She also has a very slow and very orb-hungry playstyle, as well as a horribly restrictive subpool of only fire healers. So she badly needs a buff or a rework to include different types, but even then, it's going to be hard to justify her at this point in time. So I would really not purchase Shan Mei, because the thing is, 3 Shan Meis cost 900,000 monster points. With 900,000 monster points, you could buy a Yomi Dragon, an Odin Dragon, and let's say a Neptune Dragon for kicks. All those cards are more viable overall than Shan Mei, or you could even buy a Dark Athena and just obliterate content with a less stellar team. It's ridiculous how poor Shan Mei is at this point in time, and I strongly encourage you not to purchase her. And last but not least, possibly least, is Yao Yu. And in terms of their benefits, they have high spike damage and reasonable damage of only 8 water orbs, but they also have a scaling multiplier, so they can achieve a reasonably high spike damage. Unfortunately, they're just another glass cannon leader, and Sarasvati exists, Mary exists, plenty of other farming glass cannon leaders exist that do this more efficiently than Yao Yu. They also have no health and recovery multiplier, as well as having a somewhat orb-hungry nature because you generally need to stack numerous water orbs to hit high damage. In addition, their base active skill is relatively low impact overall. So, like Shan Mei, Yao Yu has definitely fallen quite far from grace. There's no real need to purchase him, because yes, you may be able to clear some harder content, but you probably would be able to clear much more of a different monster point purchase. So, at this point in time, I would strongly recommend you don't purchase him, just because he's not going to really be doing that much more for you that what another glass cannon leader will have, and you probably have one lying around your monster box. So, in conclusion, I hope to maintain this Monster Point Dragon tier list moving forward as new buffs, evolutions, or cards are released, because it could definitely change the way their viability occurs in the moving forward. So let me know what you think the Monster Point Dragons should be listed on this tier. Do you think someone should be higher, someone should be lower? What do you think of this review? As well as who do you think you're going to purchase with your upcoming 390,000 monster points? Let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you have a fantastic day, and happy puzzling!